Now, to start a debate through, we're going to ask Dr. Scharbrodt to approach the podium and make a speech. Hear him.
Thank you very much. I should perhaps first say that I'm not here as a Muslim apologetic in order to defend or promote Islam. I'm here as an academic who spent a significant amount of his professional career studying and researching Islam. And I suppose as a proper academic, I will perhaps dissect, deconstruct the motion slightly, problematize it. Some might say that the motion is in itself problematic. Some might even say it's nonsensical, and not necessarily because the actual conclusion, the actual decision is obvious, as the other side might argue. But I would say Islam, as any religion, cannot be peaceful or violent, because Islam is not an actor. Islam as such, as an abstract reality, somewhere up in the sky, does not exist. It is Muslims who make Islam, live Islam, practice Islam, understand Islam in various ways. Muslims, as human beings, are actors, and it is Muslims who are either violent or peaceful, or who understand their religion to be one of peace or not. And the same is true for other religions. Christianity is not Christianity that is either peaceful or not, or Hinduism or Buddhism for the matter, but it's Christians, Hindus or Buddhists, who are either peaceful or violent. And if it is true that Muslims as human actors make Islam, determine what Islam is, interpret Islam as they see fit, we have to say that the overwhelming majority of Muslims are peaceful. They're peaceful people who want to live decent, ordinary lives, raise their families, pay their mortgage back, try to make contributions to wider society, and coexist with other members of the societies in which they live, whether they're in the majority or in a minority. It is only a fringe group within contemporary Islam that makes the headlines nowadays that are violent and use Islam as a source to justify violence. And obviously we have this debate about whether Islam is peaceful or not. When it comes to other religions, such as Christianity, do we deny that the majority of Christians are peaceful and that indeed Christianity is a peaceful religion when we see the burning crosses of the Ku Klux Klan? Do we doubt at any moment that Christianity is in its inner core a religion that strives for peace when we hear about fundamentalist Christians blowing up abortion clinics and killing doctors and expecting mothers and even the unborn lives that they're carrying in their wombs? Do we feel the need to defend the inherently peaceful nature of Christianity when we see Orthodox Christian priests blessing servant soldiers before they slaughter Croats and Bosnians? No, we wouldn't necessarily. We would say these are fringe movements within Christianity. These are fundamentalist bigots who mix religion with politics. Yet, when it comes to Islam, we have this debate. Why is that? I would argue it is because we in Europe view Islam as a religion that has, to say the least, a problematic relationship with violence. But where does this view come from? The notion that Islam is a somehow violent religion is not just something that emerged in the West after 9/11 and the following terrorist attacks, or that sort of people discussed with the rise of ISIS in the Middle East. The European view that Islam is a violent religion is part of our collective memory and dates back to the early Middle Ages when Europeans encountered Islam for the first time. And there are several reasons for this view. One is theological. European Christians at the time believed that Christianity is the final religion, that humanity possesses with Christianity ultimate truth. It doesn't need anything else. That Muhammad claimed to be a new prophet of God, bringing a revelation that claims to supersede Christianity, was viewed by European Christians in the early Middle Ages as a scandal. But that people actually converted to this false religion, in their eyes, was beyond comprehension. How could Christians, possessing the ultimate truth, actually leave their religion and become followers of Islam, a false religion? There was only one explanation for them. They were forced to convert, because any reasonable person who has once received the gift of Christianity would not give it away voluntarily. Hence, the notion that has existed in Europe since the early Middle Ages that religion is a religion that spreads by the sword. That was the conclusion that European Christian observers took in the early Middle Ages. That the historical realities were more complex is now increasingly recognized. It was actually Christianity that, for the most part, was spread by the sword among European pagans, who became subjects of Christian rulers. Very often they were given the choice either to be baptized or to be killed, and obviously given these two options, the choice was very easy in many ways for understandable reasons. While the treatment of non-Muslims under Islamic rule in the Middle Ages cannot be compared with modern notions of human rights and freedom of religion, Jews and Christians were at least allowed to keep and practice their religion under Islamic rule. Indeed, while the Arabs established a major new empire stretching from Spain to China just 150 years after the death of Muhammad, they were initially the minority in their own empire, with the vast majority of its population and their subjects being Christian, Jews, and followers of other religions. It took almost 5 centuries until these territories became fully Islamized and the majority of its population Muslim. So apart from the theological threat that was perceived in Islam since the early Middle Ages, Islam was perceived to be, and the Arab Muslim Empire constituted a real political and military threat to European Christendom in the early Middle Ages, having conquered Spain, raiding into southern France up to the Alps. And some say the only reason why the Arabs did not venture further is because they didn't like the colder climate of Northern Europe. Hence, the notion that Islam is a violent religion is deeply ingrained in European cultural memory and has been part of European discourse on Islam, whether from a Christian theological perspective in the Middle Ages or very secular intellectual perspectives since the last 2 centuries. Muslim conquered North Africa, the Middle East, Central Asia in the early days of Islam, went to Europe and ruled over Spain and established one of the most powerful empires at that time. Some people would say, does this not prove that Islam, since its early days, has been an expansionist, domineering religion? In my view, I don't think it says anything about Islam. It doesn't say anything about Islam. It says something about early Muslims and how they used Islam to justify the creation of an empire that is based on their religion. And early Muslims learned actually the lessons of other empires that preceded them, the Byzantine Empire, the Iranian Persian Empire, all empires ruling over the Middle East at that time, before Islam came about, that were strongly based on religion and used religion as the justifying ideology to legitimize the imperial expansion. So Islam, as any other religion, is not an actor. It is the followers of religion that are human actors, and they decide how Islam should be lived and understood. And as the example from the early history of Islam illustrates, it is the political context that determines how a religion is used by those in political power. This was the case in the early days of Islam, and this is true today as well. And this is true for all religions that have been and are associated with political power and used to justify it, whether it is Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, or Hinduism. While the followers of all religions claim that their religions promote peace, the track record of all these religions and their followers in promoting it has not been particularly great, both historically and in the present. Religions are powerful political and social forces. Therefore, they're used to mobilize the followers for particular causes to further political agendas of those in power. When we hear about groups like ISIS in the contemporary world and see the violent images coming from the Middle East and other parts of the Muslim world, we need to ask, who is behind this? Who benefits from this? and what goals are to be achieved by this. And what we should not do, we should not project these images onto the vast majority of Muslims that live here in Europe or other parts in the world, and who are peaceful and want to live in peace with their neighbors and other members of society. I think it is inherently unfair to project the actions of a small minority on the vast majority of Muslims. And so in a roundabout way, it is Muslims who decide whether Islam is peaceful or not. And as most Muslims are indeed peaceful, I ask the House to support the motion that Islam is a peaceful religion. Thank you very much.
Now, thank you for that speech, and move to our first speech in opposition from al-Qadri.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much for the invitation, and thanks very much for the history lesson, where we learned that actually it's all a massive theological and historical misunderstanding. So, on behalf of Christians everywhere, may I apologise for the Crusades and say that we will never, ever, ever do it again. And how about we make a deal then? You stop suicide bombing people and stop killing your own people, and finally stop scoring points over matters that don't count to anybody. This is every time we debate Islam in the West. I'm not talking about Islam in the Middle East, I'm talking specifically about Islam in the West. We hear all the usual tropes about how it was more enlightened, it was a greater home for science than Christianity was at the time. All these facts are irrefutable, nobody is denying them. But the simple fact of the matter is that the motion that's here tonight is that Islam is a religion of peace. Now, why are we not debating Hinduism as a religion of peace? Why are we not debating Christianity as a religion of peace? Why is it the only religion that we constantly have this call for debate about Islam as the religion of peace? It's almost as if Islam keeps on throwing up certain incidents and certain countries and certain terrorist atrocities that would nearly give the casual observer the indication that actually it's not really that peaceful a religion at all. Now, as much as the previous speaker said, the vast majority of Muslims are very peaceful people, we all know that. Only a nutter would deny that the vast majority of Muslims are very peaceful people. But the thing about it is, only a nutter would have turned around during the Cold War and said that communism, on the one hand, is an ideology that is completely anathema to our beliefs, but yet at the same time would then expect to be accused of being racist against Russians or being racist against Chinese. The simple fact of the matter is that we can spend all night talking about the religious twos and fours. The Islam that we now deal with, even though it's not the Islam that the other speaker would like to talk about, we're not talking about a religion. We're talking about an expansionist, violent ideology that is causing absolute chaos throughout the world. And we have to be prepared to confront that. The simple fact of the matter is, when was the last Christian cartoonist who had to go into hiding because he drew a cartoon about the Pope? There aren't any.
Martin Turner.
I'm not sure that Martin Turner is actually in hiding. Dublin College University, the Quisling's homeland. Look, the simple fact of the matter is that everybody, and I wrote about this thing today, right? And I've been saying this for decades, and so many other people. This is not having a go at individual Muslims. The vast majority of people just want to go about their lives. That shouldn't even have to be said. Now, it's interesting as well that if you want to look at emigration patterns, we don't have vast swathes of people from the West trying to emigrate to Muslim countries because they know the rights that we take for granted, the rights that are enshrined under the UN Declaration of Human Rights, the rights that we all have grown up with. There's no element of Sharia law in there. The simple fact of the matter is, you can be gay in Galway. Nobody cares. It doesn't matter. You can be a woman with a strong opinion in Galway. Nobody cares. In fact, you better be a woman with a strong opinion in Galway from the Galwegian women that I know. And nobody cares. But we are dealing with an ideology. People, we need to get past this whole religion thing. You can weigh the Bible up on one hand, you can weigh the Torah up on the other, you can put the Quran up on your head. But the simple fact of the matter is that of those three books, if you were to burn the Quran, that's the one that you better go into hiding over, because that's the one the followers of the Quran will kill you. Nobody is going to kill you if you burn the Bible. Right? Nobody is going to go after you for expressing yourself. and expressing. We saw even on the last word the other night, there was a guy on and he said he's talking about suing the European Court of Human Rights because he wants to be declared effectively an apostate from Catholicism. That's fine, but look to the guy, if he wants to do a letter writing campaign, he can do it. But he hasn't been into hiding. And this is the question I would ask my friends and colleagues over to my right here. Why is, if Islam is such a religion of peace, why does it terrify so many people? It's not all Fox News, it's not all George Bush. It's a fear of Islamic extremism, it's not a fear of Muslims. And yet, through the cowardice and the atrophy that we've seen in the West, through a fear of being seen as being racist, through a fear of being seen as being intolerant, we actually, through our own liberal values, are being strangled upon ourselves because through our liberal values we are prepared to tolerate intolerance. Now, with the three gentlemen here, would all three of them say that, like 78% of the British Muslims did in the wake of the Danish Muhammad cartoon controversy, that the cartoonist should be prosecuted? Or that Salman Rushdie deserves a fatwa on his head for writing a really, really terrible book? No, nobody does. The reality is we have extremists in every faith, but more importantly we have extremists in every ideology, and what we're dealing with here is an expansionist ideology which, lest we forget, is a bigger threat to Muslims around the world than it is even to us. But we are allowing it in. We can see it in France, we look at Britain. You have people going into Leeds and being told that part of Beeston is a Muslim area, where you have mobile Sharia squads. We wouldn't tolerate that if that was in the 30s and there were roving bands of fascists walking around beating up Jews. And yet we see the rise of anti-Semitism across Europe, which actually, interestingly enough, does tie in with the usual sort of right-wing Christian, if you like, Western nutters. And we have this terrifying synthesis of two fundamentalist and extremist ideologies which we're seeing at the moment, which is European fascism and Middle Eastern Islamofascism. And they are a danger to all of us. Muslim, Christian, I'm an atheist. I'm not here to bang the Catholic drum. I'm not here to promote any religion. I'm simply here to promote the idea that the free expression of ideas. And frankly, anybody here who doesn't realise that if they were to be in a faith, if you're a woman here and you're in the faith and you married somebody outside, the chances are somebody in your family is going to want to kill you. That is not a religion of peace. If you go against certain fatwas, if you go against certain orders, the chances are you're not just going to be shunned by your community, you're going to be killed. That is not a religion of peace. You look at, say for example, in America, where South Park, one of the great popular satires of our time, they did a whole thing of the fact that it was accepted that if they went against Muhammad, they were going to run the risk of being killed. Now, I've had numerous occasions with numerous death threats from Muslims, which I'm sure every peaceful Muslim would absolutely decry, and I've met some there's a really lovely Sufi mosque up in Talbot Street. I get on very well with the Muslims there. They are appalled by it. But the simple fact of the matter is that I don't have that coming from Christians. I don't have it coming from Jews. Anybody who puts their head up above the trenches runs the risk of physical violence and runs the risk of death. Now, that in itself is fine. The real problem is when you have the majority going, well, what did you expect? In the same way that the cartoonist, he's accused of provoking Islam. Salman Rushdie was accused of provoking Islam. How many people here, if we all grew up, assuming that most of us here grew up as sort of traditional Irish Catholic with a small C background, we have all lampooned and blasphemed against the faith. We all did it without the fear of ever being killed. None of us are running the risk of losing our livelihood, losing our family, and losing everything, simply because we don't agree with, let us remember, it's an ideology that we're dealing with here. It's not a religion. You're not talking about a faith. It's incompatible with the West. We only saw it recently with the blasphemy law that people were trying to bring in Ireland. The big supporters of that in the UN, Saudi Arabia, what a surprise. Any society that allows these Islamic values in is waving goodbye to freedom of speech, it's waving goodbye to freedom of conscience, and we are effectively sleepwalking into cultural suicide. Now, we can afford to have this debate here, and people can afford to disagree with me, and I know that there are some people in the room who agree, and I know that there are quite a few in the room who don't agree. That is the joy of the society that we live in. But the one thing I do know is that I can talk here, and everybody on both sides, we can talk, we can disagree, we can have a row about it afterwards. Nobody is going to get killed. Would we be having this debate in any Muslim country? where there wouldn't have to be security outside those doors to make sure that people are vetted. That is the simple fact of the matter. And honestly, ladies and gentlemen, we all know that. But too many of you are too afraid to actually put up your hands and say, yeah, we know. This is the threat. It's worse than Ebola, it's worse than climate change. The simple fact of the matter is that we face a threat of being blown up, not by these gentlemen, not by anybody else here in the room. We are at war. And we're too afraid, and we're too concerned with infighting and bickering amongst the liberal intellectual elite left to accept who the true enemy is. The true enemy is not Muslims. Otherwise you end up just being one of those idiots in the English Defence League, and through that way lies Knights of Broken Glass and chaos. But we still have to be prepared to go, if you believe in things, it's not about what you don't believe, it's if you do believe in universal suffrage, if you believe in gay rights, if you believe in the right to write a book that will offend people, or draw a cartoon that will offend people, or produce a movie that will offend people, if you believe in all of those things, well then, ladies and gentlemen, you believe in the West. And that means your values are anathema to the values that we're seeing coming out of Islamic countries. And this is what it's all about. It's about freedom. It's not about religious respect or religious tolerance. Forget about the religion and things. It's about how we go about and live our lives. And the simple fact of the matter is that if we were to accept any more Islamic pressure on us, they will change how we live our lives. They already have, in the sense that there are certain things that we can write about the Catholic Church, or you can write about other religions, that you either can't write about because your bosses won't let you, or because you're afraid of being sued, or because you actually run the very real risk of being killed. There are people being killed in Holland, there have been people killed in England, there are people being killed in European soil for having the simple temerity to stand up and go, I don't agree with this. Now, the very fact that they're being killed, I think, proves the validity of my point. Islam is not a religion of peace. If it was, we wouldn't be standing here tonight. Thank you.
So while I just fix the screen for a second, I'll ask Abdullah al-Andalusi to approach the podium to make a speech. Oh no. No, we're going to have a quick swap and go to Sheikh Dr. Umar al-Qadri.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah, most compassionate, ever merciful, Mr. President, dear distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to greet you with the Islamic greeting, which consists of words that every Muslim utters when he meets another person. And if you know the reply to those, the reply to that greeting, please do reply loudly. Assalamu alaikum. Now, that didn't mean I'm going to kill you. That didn't mean I'm going to butcher you. It doesn't mean I'm going to behead you. What does it mean? It means peace be with you. The greeting is the first interaction between humans. Islam itself gives such a greeting that is testimony to the fact that the religion, Islam, is a religion which highlights and expresses that the religion of Islam is a religion of peace. And this is why the greeting is peace be with you. Whether you meet a Muslim or whether you meet a non-Muslim, this is how a Muslim would greet another person. Secondly, I'd like to thank the Literary and Debating Society of NUI Galway for organizing and inviting me to this much needed debate, since in this day and age, not only is my religion being hijacked by extremist militants, but at the same time it is given legitimate ground by those that claim and propagate that Islam is a religion of violence and terror. I'm not going to modify the motion, because I strongly believe that Islam in itself is a religion of peace. And I want to make one thing clear, ladies and gentlemen. We Muslims do not derive the teachings of our faith from an action of any individual, any state, any group, or any media report. Similarly, I would like to request, please do not understand our religion, interpret our religion, derive the teachings of our religion through the actions of individuals, groups, states, or even media reports. Where do we derive our teachings from? The teachings of Islam are derived from two main sources. First, the Quran, the revelation of God. And secondly, the Sunnah. Sunnah is the prophetic conduct, the conduct, the behavior, and the practical demonstration of Prophet Muhammad's life that is a practical demonstration of the revelation of God. In fact, I'd like to point your attention and divert your attention to this hadith, which is an authentic hadith, which all Muslims agree unanimously on its authenticity. That the Prophet 1400 years ago, the Prophet of Islam, foretold us that there will be people that will distort the message of the religion Islam. There will be people that will try to hijack Islam. There will be people that will be militants, extremists, suicide bombers. And he has clearly said in the hadith, which is narrated by Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim, he mentioned that there will be people that they will derive from Islam misguidance. They will derive from the Quran misguidance. And there will be people that will derive from the Quran and the Sunnah guidance. So he was asked by the companions, "O Prophet Muhammad, who will be the people that will derive the true teachings of our faith?" The Prophet Muhammad gave a criteria, and he said, "La tajma'u ummati ala al-dalala, alaykum bis-sawad al-a'zam," which means that my religion, or the followers of my religion, their understanding, their interpretation, their behavior will always, the majority of them will always be on the haqq, on the truth. So if the message of Islam is ambiguous and you are confused about it, and if the message is distorted, some claim that Islam is a religion of peace and some claim that Islam is a religion of violence, what should you do? The Prophet has told us you should look at the actions of the majority of my people. Are the majority peaceful or are the majority violent people? And the answer, of course, we all know, 99.9% of the Muslim world, 1.6 billion people on this earth, a quarter of the world's population are all peaceful people. So I would like to humbly advise, please do not understand our faith by any individual, group or state. Instead, understand it from the Quran and Sunnah and from the practice of the majority of the Muslim world. Also, please, allow me to say this, do not understand our faith from the speeches and talks of atheists, because they dislike all faiths. Allow me to say this, that to understand Islam from those that dislike and hate Islam is like understanding Judaism from authors that belong to Nazis. Similarly, ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to the topic of religion, those that oppose Islam are not very sophisticated in the way of thinking. Any problem that is limited to some countries, I heard the example of Saudi Arabia being given, individuals or groups, is directly blamed to Islam. If we were to apply the same standard of those that oppose Islam and claim that it is a violent religion, then let us take Christianity, for example, as the first speaker mentioned. And I'd like to add to that 6 million Jews were killed in 1940 by the Europeans. And at that time, Germany consisted of 55% Protestants, 40% Catholics, which means 95% of its population were Christians. So does that mean that I believe that Christianity is a religion of violence? No, it doesn't. I don't believe that. I don't apply this standard. Similarly, there are Buddhist monks at this moment butchering women and children in Myanmar. Does that mean that I believe that all Buddhism and Buddhists are all supporting violence and terror? No, I do not apply this standard, as I said. I and Mark are known to be pro-Zionists. The Zionist state of Israel has committed war crimes, killed far more non-combatant civilians. The Zionist state of Israel has killed in this year alone far more non-combatant civilians, children, women than Muslim extremists have ever killed in Europe. But yet I do not say that Jews or Judaism is to be blamed for killing innocent Christian and Muslim Palestinians. As I said, I do not apply the same standard. Similarly, there are extremist atheists. Millions of people have died in Russia and China under the communist governments that are atheistic. So does that mean that atheism is a violent ideology? As I said, I do not apply this standard. This standard in itself, to claim that a religion is violent because an extreme minority is violent, that claim to follow that religion, itself is in fact bigotry. I will not blame religions, because I believe all religions, whether Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, are all based on compassion, love, and mercy. I argue that no religion teaches violence and hatred. All religions aim to bring peace to the society through peace and through the inner self. Those that are related to religion and are violent, their interpretation is violent. Their understanding is violent. Their approach is violent. They are violent, but that doesn't mean that the religion they adhere to is violent. Violence comes from an extremist state of mind. This extremism is a state of mind which is a human psychological problem. There are many factors that influence a person's state of mind and make him an extremist. The opposition may argue, since I'm a Muslim theologian, that I'm biased. Let me present to you facts and figures published by the MI5 and Europol. The MI5 and Europol have published researches on understanding radicalization and extremism that conclude that it is not religion that is the driven force behind terrorism. Instead, there are other reasons like immigration, racism, psychological disorders, etc. Islam, ladies and gentlemen, is a religion of 1.6 billion people, Muslim in the world. It is the most diverse religion in the history of the world. Islam is a religion that promotes peace. The opposition uses small percentage of extremists that in fact have nothing to do with Islam. That Islam that was brought by the Prophet Muhammad. That Islam that is mentioned in the Holy Quran. The Islam that the Prophet Muhammad 1400 years ago brought is the Islam that says, Man qatala nafsin bighayri nafsin faka'annama qatala an-nasi jami'a. Whoever kills one person, it is like he has killed all of humanity. Whoever has saved one person, it is like he has saved all of humanity. The Islam that the Prophet Muhammad 1400 years ago brought and is adopted and practiced and understood by 99.9% Muslims around the world is the Islam in which the Prophet ﷺ said, Allah will not be merciful to those that are not merciful to His creation. The Prophet was once asked, how do you define a Muslim? Who is a Muslim? And you know his reply wasn't, a Muslim is the one who believes in one God, a Muslim is the one who believes homosexuals are going to hell. He didn't say Muslims are the one who are suicide bombers. What did he say? He said, Al-Muslimu man salima al-Muslimuna min lisanihi wa yadihi. A Muslim is the one who for others is a source of peace, from whose hands and tongue except peace there is nothing. That is the Islam that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, brought. Now, the speaker from the opposition mentioned homosexuality. Let me just be very clear on this. That yes, 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, they have their own values. They have their own norms. Do not force your values on the Muslims. Because that would be like Muslims trying to force their values on you. And we are not allowed to do that. La ikraha fi din. There is no compulsion in religion. So please, do not think that our religion hates or we dislike and we hate and we want to annihilate homosexuality. No, the Prophet's teachings disregard of whatever thing that is considered as a sin. The Prophet said, do not hate the sinful. Hate the sin itself. So which means we don't hate homosexuals. In fact, I have met in my office in Al-Mustafa Islamic Center many times people that some of them were Muslim, some of them were not Muslim, and they were homosexuals. They wanted to talk to the Imam. They wanted to talk to me about it. And they did. And last point I want to make is that the speaker from the opposition, Ayan, I believe his name is, mentioned that the media, why is it not talking about the majority of the Muslims? Well, come on, hello, everybody knows the media is biased. Everybody knows that. You don't need to be Einstein to understand that. We in our Islamic Center, for the previous 5 years, every year hold a annual peace conference in which we invite representatives of all faiths. And we hold an interfaith peaceful gathering. And we have sent many emails to your newspapers. We have sent many emails to RTE and national television channels. But unfortunately, this is not what is interesting for them. What is interesting? Well, perhaps a crazy guy who claims to be a Muslim and who says we should annihilate homosexuals. And this is what will make news the next day. So I would like to request all of you, please vote in the light of how Muslims the majority of the Muslims behave. Vote in the light of how they interact with you, the majority of the Muslims, your friends, your colleagues, your class fellows. And please do not vote that Islam is a religion of violence, because if you do so, that means that you are saying all religions are violent, even atheism is violent. Thank you very much.
I want to thank the last speaker for his speech and ask Dr. Mark Humphrys to approach the podium. Here, here.
Madam Auditor, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for the invite. I'm an atheist, so as a result I think the last speaker would say my opinions on Islam are completely worthless. But I'd like to reassure him that at least I'm not gay. So let's get started, and we will, otherwise he'd really dislike me.
I said I don't dislike gays.
All right.
That's the problem.
We'll get into that later. I'm not gay, but I think gays deserve the right to live their own lives in peace in whatever country in the world they happen to find themselves. Now, no claps for that, I see. Let me get back to addressing the motion. Now, in one sense, this motion is a really interesting question. It is the question of the age. And in one sense, this motion is absolutely obviously false. Nobody I talked to about this motion thought, oh, that's a really strange topic for debate. Islam is a religion. And oh, I never thought about that. Oh, yeah, Islam violence. There was some incident one time. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Fascinating. Nobody thought that. Instead, they expressed concern for my safety. So everybody knows that Islam has a problem with violence, and that's why we're here. Now, in case you don't read the newspapers, I'm just going to give you a very quick list. So my plan in this speech is to really depress you to begin with, and then to kind of cheer you up at the end with an optimism that you mightn't see coming. Okay, so hopefully let's see that I'll succeed. We had 9/11, then we had the shoe bomber, we had the LA airport attacks. If you don't know these things, go Google them up and have a look at them. The Beltway sniper, the Madrid train bombings, we had the 7/7 London bombings, the 21/7. Follow up to those, the Seattle Jewish Center attack. That was just under Bush. Then under Obama, we had the Boston Marathon, Little Rock, Fort Hood, Flight 253, that was the underpants bomber, if you remember him. The Toulouse massacre, which was absolutely disgusting. The Times Square bombing attempt, the Frankfurt airport shooting, the Charlie Hebdo arson attack, the Bulgaria bus bombing, the Woolwich near beheading, and the Jewish museum shooting, and lots more to come before Obama leaves office. Before 9/11, I won't depress you with the whole list. There was the first World Trade Center bombing, the Brooklyn Bridge, the French metro bombings, the Salman Rushdie attacks and killings where they burnt down a hotel, if you remember as well as that. All of this, you'll notice, is just within the West, and I've left out a ton of them. A tiny sample, I've left out all of the Islamic terror attacks in Israel, in Russia, in India. These are only recent attacks and only in the West. Outside the West, we can start talking about Boko Haram, who the people started paying attention to this year, but of course they've been slaughtering Christians in Nigeria for years and years, for about 7 years now. We can talk about ISIS, and before that the Iraqi jihadis and the Syrian jihadis of different stripes. The Algerian jihad, does anybody remember all the village slaughters in the 1990s in Algeria? Is this all swept onto the carpet? Al-Shabaab in Somalia, who kill apostates and people who watch the World Cup. The Afghan Taliban, the Pakistani Taliban, who are slaughtering at girls' schools, at primary schools. They've had chemical attacks on girls' schools in Pakistan and Afghanistan. And then the state killing by countries like Iran and Sudan. Now, nor did we talk about the past. So our ancestors 100 years ago, as Oliver, the first speaker there, said, were well aware, had a kind of view of Islam as a violent religion, and that's because of the endless violence between Islam and the West, going right back to the start of Islam. So we had the Armenian genocide, for example, the genocide and expulsion of all non-Muslims from Turkey. And Turkey itself, of course, had been conquered by Islam, as you all well know. It was 90% Christian when it was conquered by Islam by the sword. And our ancestors were well aware of all of this. Now, I'm not going to defend Christianity. We've got a bunch of atheists here. The Christians aren't here to defend themselves. And in fact, the thing about modern Christians is they probably wouldn't defend 1400 Christianity anyway. Anyway, if you want defensive Christianity, you're in the wrong place, because it's not going to come tonight. But we're talking about Islam. And so before that, you had the forced conversion of Turkey by warfare. Before that, you had the conquest of Spain, and of course the conquest of Christian North Africa and the Christian Middle East. So what has happened is that there has been an ocean of blood for 1,400 years. So I told you I was going to depress you. Are there any good things coming? Well, there are good things coming. But let me just tell you, a chap called Bill Warner has at least attempted to put numbers in all this. I haven't talked about the Hindus. Tens of millions of Hindus killed on what you might call the Eastern Front. Bill Warner estimates that Islam has killed 270 million people over 1,400 years. And that's more than communism. I thought communism was the top killer. According to Bill Warner, Islam is the greatest killer of all time in the history of the world. Now, he might be right, his numbers might be too high, but the fact is there is an ocean of blood there caused by Islam, and one caused by Christianity, and one caused by communism, etc. I agree with that. But the idea that Islam for 1,400 years has been a religion of peace is comically false. So is there anything to debate? I should just sit down now. At this point I've improved the point and not push it any further by trying to attempt some other argument. I'm going to attempt something, which is, what does this ocean of blood have to do with most Muslims? And what does this ocean of blood have to do with the religion itself? So I'm going to attempt a couple of things, and they won't be exactly nice answers that make everyone. I'm not here to make everybody feel happy. So, are most Muslims jihadists? Well, of course they're not. Most Muslims around the world, and 1.6 billion of them, as somebody mentioned, they want to live life, they want to bring up their family, they want their kids to go to school, and they want to be able to afford a reasonable house and a car or whatever. And that's great. And in the history of the world, it's often the people who stay home are the heroes. And the people who go out with ideas are actually quite often the villains. So it is ideas that put people into gas chambers. If you're selfish and hedonistic and stay home and watch TV, you won't be putting people into gas chambers. It's because you believe in some kind of ridiculous load of nonsense that you end up chemically bombing girls' schools in Pakistan, or putting kids in gas chambers in Poland. So most Muslims stay home. Now, but do they support the jihadis in principle, or at least rhetorically, or from the comfort of their armchair? Well, obviously not 100%. That's obviously true, but so what? Is it 1%? Now, so here we need to turn to opinion polls, and I've got a bunch of opinion polls which I'll have to speed through a few, and they're mixed, and that's my message. The message on this is mixed. It's not necessarily happy clappy, it is mixed. In the year 2000, this is before 9/11, 73% of Palestinians supported suicide attacks against America, not against Israel, against probably more against Israel, but against America. This is before 9/11. After 9/11, 2002, 52% of Egyptians supported 9/11 in 2002. So these are majorities. I'm not even talking about the countries, so there's 30% support for 9/11 or 40%. We can find countries with majority support. In 2004, the majority in Jordan and Morocco, the majority of the population supported suicide bombing of the Jews of Israel. In 2006, 40% of Indonesian Muslims would use violence against those blaspheming Islam. The numbers go on. They're not necessarily that good. There's 20% here, 30% there, 40%. 51% of Jordanians support Hezbollah, 56% support Hamas, 54% of Nigerians support bin Laden, that's 2010, 2013, 35% of Palestinians support Al-Qaeda. So, jihadism is not a lunatic fringe. The message that I'm giving you is that jihadism is one very mainstream interpretation of Islam. It might be a terrible interpretation according to some people, and that's great. I certainly hope most people agree it's a terrible interpretation, but it's mainstream and it goes right back to the start of Islam, and it is supported by, let us say, 20% of all Muslims, so 300 million people. Okay? So remember, it's 300 million. It's not 1.6 billion. So don't say it's 1.6 billion. If anybody does, nobody does that I know of. But let's not say it's 300,000, because that's not true either. It's more like 300 million. So a bit depressing, a bit dark. The second thing is, does it have anything to do with the religion of Islam? Here, I think the answer is also somewhat depressing, because of course it does. Where else do you think these people get these ideas? The Boko Harams and the Taliban and all that. As far as they're concerned, it's a lot to do with the religion of Islam. It is Islam. It's not even just a political movement based on Islam. It's Islam itself. So all of these groups, Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, the 9/11 bombers, the 7/7, all of these people are getting their inspiration from a particular reading of the religion of Islam, and a reading that I am here to say is very mainstream, and that's our big problem. It's not tiny fringes. There's the disturbing question of would the Prophet Muhammad approve of this? Now, I am going to go out on a limb here and suggest that he probably would. I think the Prophet Muhammad would not necessarily have a problem with violence. Even his admirers, I'm sure plenty of his admirers here, would have to agree that he was involved in a huge amount of warfare, violence and assassinations in the last 10 years. I'll just give you one example, which is the slaughter of the Jews of the Banu Qurayza, I don't know if I pronounced that right, where he beheaded all the males and took the females captive as booty, and children were sold into slavery. Now, this was just one particular event, but there were a huge number of other violent acts. There were assassinations of critics and so on. So I think, not having any particular great following for the religion of Islam or any other religion, I think the idea that Muhammad would disapprove of al-Qaeda certainly would have to remain unproven. So I'm painting an absolutely miserable picture. 300 million people support jihad. It's firmly rooted in Islam. Muhammad would probably approve. It's been going on for 1,400 years. Is there any hope? I'm going to give you three things where I think that there is hope. And the first one is that you may not predict what I'm about to say. The first one is that religions do not have to be logical. Religions do not have to follow their founders. Now, what do I mean by this? Religions don't have to be logical. Well, again, I think there is no religion that is based on logic and evidence. If you're into logic and evidence, you've been to science and atheism. Religions are based on faith, which is a belief in things that can't really be justified by the standard methods of logic and evidence. So I'll give you a quick example based on attacking Moses, of all people, which is in Numbers 31 when Moses ordered all the rapes, right? You know all that? In Numbers 31 when Moses said, "You didn't rape those women, I'm annoyed with you." Right? No, you don't know it because Christians and Jews don't talk about it, right? And that's a good thing. Christians and Jews don't talk about it because it's kind of embarrassing what Moses said in Numbers 31. He was angry with his army for not raping all the women. They were the Midianites. I can give you the whole thing later, but I'm running out of time. So, Christians and Jews claim to follow Moses, but they don't follow that. In fact, nobody follows Moses. So how do religions do that? It's because they are irrational. They found some kind of way, theologically, to say that this is where they came from, this is the tradition they came from, but they don't follow it at all. In fact, I think Moses would be horrified if he came down to earth and saw what Christianity and Judaism is. He'd want to have killed Jesus, for example. He'd have agreed with the crucifixion. So can Islam do this? I think that it's already happening, but the people I see doing it are the Ahmadis, who've started up a mosque here in Galway. Now, the Ahmadis are great. There have been 24,000 Islamic terrorist attacks in history. No, since 2001, since 9/11. There have been 24,000 Islamic terrorist attacks. As far as I know, and you can correct me, not a single one was done by an Ahmadi Muslim. So the Ahmadi Muslims, and they deserve a round of applause for that, to be honest, but the Ahmadi Muslims have a theological belief that any kind of justice needs to be implemented in the next life, or whatever. Now, I don't believe in next lives or whatever, but whatever gets them through the day is brilliant. The Ahmadis are much to be admired. Whatever they want to believe, if that's what they believe, we can all live with them. Let me tell you one thing. If every Muslim in the world was an Ahmadi Muslim, there would be no terrorism. So think about that. None of those groups would exist that I have talked about. Now, I'm going to now annoy the Ahmadi Muslims, and I've annoyed the chair because I've gone on too long, by saying that if Muhammad came back to life, he might approve of them, but it doesn't matter. So, what is my optimism for the future? My optimism is that Islam will evolve in the direction that the Ahmadis show, that violence or whatever is symbolic or should be put in the past, and justice is for Allah, and whatever. They can come up with some theological fudge, you might like, or new argument, if you prefer that, to make it all good and make it that we are going to be peaceful, we aren't going to persecute gays, we aren't going to persecute apostates, we aren't going to persecute blasphemers. Allah will sort all that out. Now, that's what I want to see. Is it going to happen? I just say it could happen, and the great example of why it could happen is Christianity. Because if I was saying any of the stuff I've been saying, in 1500 AD in Galway, I'd been taken out and burnt to the stake as an atheist, as a heretic, as a blasphemer, as a dissenter. So how on earth did Christianity change from that? The fact is, religions change over hundreds of years, and they can become the opposite of what they used to be because they're not based on logic. So I have a hope that this will happen. I'll have to tell you the reasons why I do have some hope. Most counter-jihadists have no hope at all that the world will get any better. They think it's all going to get worse. I do have some hope, but I'm kind of out of time, but I'm just raising the possibility that in the long run, maybe not in our lifetimes, but in 100 to 200 years, Islam will be entirely like Ahmadi Islam. Thank you.
Thanks, Speaker, for his speech there. I'm sure if you want to hear some of his optimism, he'll be happy to tell you at the end of the debate. Now I want to move on to our final speaker in proposition, Abdullah al-Andalusi. Here.
You left out a few more hours. You know, I once encountered some pro-EDL thug on the street, and he goes, "You Muslim?" It's like, "Yeah." "You suicide bomber?" I'm like, how do you answer that? "Yes, of course, I've been doing suicide bomber for the last 2 years. It's a good career. Life insurance premiums are a little high, but your employers are willing to pay half your return ticket costs, so that's good." Now, we've heard a lot about what Islam is, what Islam isn't. Obviously, the proposition side, we've heard a bit more citation of text, but here's the issue. What is Islam, or what defines Islam? Islam can't and shouldn't be defined by the people who follow it, but rather by the text, the teachings of the text. You have to go back to the text to understand what it says and understand what Islam actually is. Is it really for peace? Is it really for what? You know, how do we judge these things? So, let's go back to the text. The Quran, its viewpoint to the world, viewpoint to non-Muslims, is very clear. It says there should be no compulsion in religion, for truth is clear from falsehood. This is a verse of the Quran. Another verse of the Quran, which is a bit more interesting in how in its approach to this, said, if God so willed, he would have made the entire world one religion altogether. So who is it for you to compel people to believe? Belief is only by the permission of God. So the Quran is saying that the reason that in this world there are people who are not Muslim, Hindu, Christian, Jew, this is expected. This is what God willed it to be. God willed it to be like this, so how can anyone compel people to be any different? People only change their belief by God's will and not by our will. So for the Muslim, there's no point going around the world and trying to force convert people by the point of a sword or the AK-47 or whatever, because God willed that the whole world would be different. That, you know, if God wanted everyone to be Muslim, he would have made them all Muslim. That's not what he willed. This is what the Quran says, what it says in the text. We will see what did the Prophet Muhammad teach about how Muslims to treat non-Muslims. The Prophet Muhammad, referring to non-Muslims, said, anyone who's harmed them has harmed me. The Prophet Muhammad is the most beloved to Muslims. I mean, Muslims, we wouldn't want to see a hair on his head being touched and harmed. But he equated his safety and security to the safety and security that we should provide to non-Muslims. This is what the Prophet Muhammad commanded. He also said that as Muslims we're not even allowed to humiliate or to swindle or to take anything from a non-Muslim without their consent in terms of property or anything. Not even humiliate. As Muslims we're not even allowed to humiliate. And the Prophet Muhammad warned us as Muslims that if we did so, he would ask God to curse us on the Day of Judgment. He would basically be telling God to punish us on the Day of Judgment. Our own Prophet accusing us before God on the Day of Judgment if we mistreated or humiliated a non-Muslim. This is not some airy-fairy, hippie-like guy saying this, claiming Islam says this. This is what the Prophet Muhammad himself said, who is an authority about Islam, I should think. Did you know that non-Muslims are not under the Sharia? For as my studied colleague who studied Islamic history will also affirm that for hundreds of years non-Muslims were never expected to be under the Sharia because Sharia only applies to Muslims. In Ottoman time, Ottoman land, Ottoman Caliphate, which is 700 years, Christians had their own courts, Jews had their own courts, their own authorities. In many cases, they had autonomous zones which they could do whatever they wanted, it's their land. Muslims didn't come in to impose Sharia on non-Muslims, but rather the Sharia is a law for Muslims only. Because how is it fair to impose a law on people who don't believe in it? What's the point, right? To save yourself, it's your belief. And then you can, when you believe in Islam, then you can act on the law. If you don't even believe in Islam, what's the point of acting on the law? They don't save you. So why would Muslims, even logically, why would Muslims want to apply Sharia or impose Sharia or go around the world and colonize countries like other such powers do and enforce their universal laws on everyone else? We don't say our law is universal for all. We say our law is for Muslims, although we say Islam is universal for all mankind, but only on voluntary acceptance. It has to be voluntary. What does Islam say about women? It hasn't been mentioned yet. But, well, actually, one person mentioned about universal suffrage. Maybe we invented it. 1400 years ago, the Prophet Muhammad required that Muslim leaders be given the Pledge of Allegiance, which justifies them to be leaders, by men and women. We didn't need any suffragettes movements, which were also terrorists, by the way. They blew up things in the UK and so on and so on. Terrorism is quite common in history, unfortunately, and done by a whole variety of movements. But we didn't need to have a suffragette movement. Women actually had the right to vote, own her own property, and not even have to change her name when she gets married. So we had true multiculturalism. We had, in the Quran, by the way, it says male and female, the deeds are like the other. The deeds of one is like the other. So there is equality in Islam. This is from the Quran. I'm quoting from text here. I'm not just making it up or saying it or claiming it. This is what the Quran says. Again, a book which has some authority within Islam, I should think. What about warfare? Well, what does the Quran say about warfare? That we fight for two particular reasons. One is defense, and one is against oppressive regimes or government. The Quran says, what is wrong with you that you fight not in the way of God for those who are oppressed amongst men, women, and children, and then those who cry out to say, "Oh Lord, send us from you someone who will protect us." So the Quran is saying, well, to Muslims, what is wrong with you that you fight not for the oppressed, the weak and the oppressed amongst people on the earth, men, women, children, not only Muslims, but also non-Muslims too. Many of these regimes, the Emperor of Persia, the Emperor of Rome, who actually was of Constantinople, the Byzantine Roman Empire, these were autocratic dictators, these were oppressive regimes. In many of these cases, they were ruling over Arabs who were living in Syria and so on, who were Romanized Arabs, but they were oppressed by taxes. The Muslims unburdened them of their taxes, and they actually preferred Muslim rule, stated by many Western historians, have noticed and noted down that many non-Muslims had, at that time, or the vast majority, preferred Muslim rule to Byzantine Roman rule and the oppressive Persian rule. These were oppressive tyrants and dictators. They weren't all, airy-fairy people. What about... we also see, how do we treat people who offer us peace? So if Muslims encounter a nation who is not belligerent, how are we to act with this nation? Here's what the Quran says, not me, here's what the Quran says. It says this: but if they desist fighting you and offer you peace, then God does not give you a way to fight them or an excuse against them. So if people offer you peace and don't fight you, then God does not give you an excuse to fight them, a way against them. There's no excuse. You can't say, well, maybe they have weapons of mass destruction. No, you have no pretext or excuse. If they don't fight you, you don't fight them. This is what the Quran says. The Abyssinian Christian kingdom, which lived right next to the center of the Islamic world for 1,000 years, and there was no invasions of their territory. Why? Because they were peaceful and because they were generally, just. And when I say 1,000, I cap it at 1,000 years because what happened was some Abyssinian Christians converted to Islam and there was a civil war that happened, but that was not from an external invasion army, that was from amongst Abyssinians themselves. So Muslims are not expansionists in the way. Now you might say, what about terrorism? How do we explain terrorism? You know what? The best person to explain the motivation of terrorists, let's go to Osama bin Laden. Okay, he's not with us at the moment. The society tried to invite him, he didn't respond. But what Osama bin Laden said in an interview to Al Jazeera, he was asked, a journalist said, Islam prohibits the killing of non-combatants, so men, women, children, weak, non-combatants, so on. So why do how do you justify terrorism? And here's what Osama bin Laden said in an interview to Al Jazeera 2002. He says, you're right, Islam does condemn these things and does prohibit those things, but the law's not set in stone. That's what he said. He said the law's not set in stone. I think it's set in stone. I'm a practicing Muslim. I should think it's set in stone. And his justification, he goes, they don't care about coming to our countries and killing our women and children, so we should give them a taste of their own medicine and to stop them from attacking us. Right? This is his justification. It's a wrong justification, as Islamic rules of warfare state very clearly that even if the enemy kill your women and children, you cannot retaliate in equal measure. This is what classical scholars have said. You have no excuse to retaliate in equal measure, even if they kill your women and children. But Osama justifies it by saying, look, did the Americans care when they bombed Nagasaki and Hiroshima about civilians? No, so why should I care? I'm thinking, is Osama bin Laden following the Prophet Muhammad or following American foreign policy as his model for how to treat? And this is the case. Go refer to Michael Schur, former head of the CIA, who mentions the grievance of these terrorists is not some war against the infidel, but rather they have grievances about being colonialized and about having their civilians killed. Now, again, it does not justify their response. Revenge is for God, it's not for humans to undertake. But you know what? I was reading throughout history this reference to a bunch of barbaric, violent people who can't be civilized, who are terrorists. And I realized, I discovered these quotes coming up in history, and it wasn't referring to Muslims. I read quotes by British media, British politicians, talking about the Irish. Yeah, hey, I'm with you on it. All right, probably Daily Mail, who knows, predecessor Daily Mail. The thing is, right, is that we've heard this narrative before. We've been here before. We've heard this again and again. Before that, it was Catholics. Catholics are a threat. Catholics can't even be tolerated. In fact, the founders of liberal democracies even said that Catholics couldn't be tolerated. You couldn't trust them because they believe in a pope who has absolute authority. We've heard all these arguments before. Oh, ironically, we're having the was it 5th of November commemoration of a Catholic terrorist, right? The thing is, terrorism didn't begin with Islam, and it didn't begin with Muslims. Rather, terrorism has a sociological explanation, and as people in Ireland you were one of the first, I suppose, experiments of England in colonialising the world, they didn't just stop with you, they went to other countries and colonialised those countries too, and those countries got angry as well, and they had a minority amongst their population who formed the equivalent of their own IRAs, and they responded using terrorist tactics. So the thing is this, terrorism is not a phenomenon of religion, it's a phenomenon, unfortunately, of humans in extreme situations. It doesn't justify it, and the whole point of religion is to give them a justification not to commit terrorism, to say, you know what, justice will come from God. The Ahmadiyyas believing justice will only come in the next life is a dangerous concept, because that means that we shouldn't work for justice in this life. We should work for justice in this life, but we can't work for revenge in this life, and that's very important. As for other points, and I'll be very brief because there were quite a lot of points mentioned, you hear citations of polls. I can give you other polls from University of Maryland which totaled up all the total deaths by ideologies and religions. And basically, Islam has only, proportionally speaking, in terms of accounting for numbers, accounting for amount of time existence in the world, has only accounted for, has only killed 1/6 as many people as Western civilization has through all its colonial wars. Not Islam itself, but you could say the Muslim civilization and so on and so forth. So, proportionally speaking, Western civilization is 6 times more murderous than the Muslim civilization, if you want to go by these statistics of looking at body counts and death counts and so on and so forth. But what we know, we're not going to see a debate. Is Western civilization a civilization of peace? That would be an interesting debate, I think, though. But I know you're looking at me to end. I'll be very brief. Firstly, we don't say that gays should be killed. We don't even have a classification to discriminate them by. In Europe, when they invented the classification homosexual, that's when discrimination of them began. For us, we don't discriminate because we don't discriminate. Full stop. We don't classify people saying, you must be defined by your sexuality. It's like me saying, you must be defined by your love of Marmite. I mean, we all have preferences, right? We all have taste or things. We all have it. Why are you discriminating? Why are you discriminating? anyway. As for, they all said that Islam doesn't tolerate women with strong opinions. The first university set up, arguably in the world, modern university, was set up by Muslim women. We had Muslim leaders involved in politics from the time of the Prophet Muhammad. We had Muslim judges, street judges, who'd go out, not like Judge Red, but they would go out and make sure that people were buying and selling and dealing fairly. Muslim women as judges. This is how Islam emancipated women from the old pagan cultural practice of the Arabs back then. Also, I mean, it talked about Islam is a present threat. I say the last offensive jihad which attacked another country was 330 years ago under the Ottomans. 330 years ago. That's older than America's been in existence. I don't think Islam is any kind of threat anytime soon on those matters. A lot more was said, and I will try to deal with it, but the mentioning of chemical bombs, which I find so hilariously hypocritical, that, oh, really? How did anyone in the Muslim world ever get chemical bombs, considering we can't even make them, right? How do we get them? Oh, well, that's right, we bought them from some good old suppliers, USA, UK. UK was even going to supply Syria recently until they got caught out in public. Yeah, so Israel used chemical weapons, white phosphorus, against Gaza, who they are starving to death. Terrorism is in how it's spoken about in the West. It depends on whose side you're on, it seems, and not the methodology. So I'll end on this. There's a lot more things that they said which I can deal with, but I'll say this. I'm actually going to say something different to my colleagues. I'm not going to tell you to vote on what the people are acting, or the majority of people are acting like a Muslim religion. I'm going to ask you to vote on what the text of Islam says, that even though Osama bin Laden admits Islam says it, I want you to vote on what the text says, what the book of the Quran says, what the Prophet Muhammad said, because they are the definers of Islam, not minorities or majorities. Thank you.
Speaker for a very fine speech, and ask for our last speech in opposition from the guest speakers, and that's from Michael Nugent. Hey, hey.
Well, thank you for inviting me here today. Is Islam a religion of peace? It's kind of like asking, is a rainbow yellow? Parts of it are, but the rainbow itself isn't. Islam covers a series of a kind of spectrum of beliefs, from a la carte Muslims who will drink alcohol, who won't wear veils but still consider themselves to be culturally Muslim, through traditional Sunnis and Shias who just live their normal lives like people do of various religions, through persecuted Ahmadis, through the more mystical Sufis, through Islamists who impose Sharia by force on people who don't want it imposed on them, through to global terrorists who will happily carve your head off because of their beliefs. Now, all of this is Islam. Collectively, all of this is Islam. And collectively, it is not a religion of peace. It is at best a religion of contradictions. For many faithful Muslims, it is a source of comfort through submission, and for many dissidents, it is a source of oppression and violence. And also, in its most significant manifestation, asking whether Islam is a religion of peace is not like asking whether Quakers or any particular religion is a religion of peace. It's not even like asking whether Christianity today is a religion of peace. It's because while Islam certainly includes religious elements, and the core of its source of claims of power is from theology, it's actually less of a religion and more of a combination of integrated religious and political and judicial ideology and system of governance. And you can't disentangle, I'm sure you will agree with me on this, you can't disentangle the religious and political and judicial elements of Islam and say that one of these is Islam. It's the combination of all of those that constitutes Islam. And because of that, Islam cannot be peaceful. Because as a system of social governance, it has to be able to use violence in order to protect Islamic values. Just as secular liberal democracy has to use violence in order to protect secular liberal democratic values. That's the nature of social governance. So the difference between Islam and secular liberal democracy is not whether they're violent or not, it's not whether they're peaceful or not, it's the values that they're underpinning and the methods that they're using and the extent to which they use violence to protect those values. And I'm going to argue that Islam disproportionately uses violence, that it's more violent, and indeed that it requires more violence to protect it, to protect its values, than does secular liberal democracy. And that's because the laws and values of secular liberal democracy have evolved over the centuries. They've evolved to reflect gradually more nuanced views about human rights, about equality before the law, about freedom from discrimination, about freedom of conscience, religion and belief. Whereas the values and the Sharia law of Islam is shackled to texts that were written hundreds of years ago, centuries ago, up to 13 centuries ago. It's shackled to those texts and it has to make whatever changes it is envisaging to be consistent with those texts and reflect the values of a considerably more violent era. Also, followers of Islam, unlike followers of secular democracy, have to believe that their ideology, their system of governance is based on a book that was dictated by the creator of the universe, and therefore it cannot be wrong. Whereas I, as a modern secular democrat, am happy to say about any of my ideological beliefs that I might be mistaken, that if you show me evidence that I'm mistaken, I'll change my mind. I won't retreat into theological claims that force me to justify retaining the ethics of a more violent and barbaric era. And when I say a more barbaric era, I'm not restricting that to Muslims, I'm saying people generally were more barbaric in times past. And at this stage, well, I was going to make the obvious point, I think everybody has said it, but I think it's important to stress it as well, that I'm talking about Islam as an ideology. I'm not talking about individual Muslims. Individual Muslims are, by and large, as ethical as anybody else on the planet. They have compassion, empathy, cooperation, reciprocity, fairness, justice, love. They have all the values, the ethical values that human beings share by virtue of our humanity. But their empathy and their compassion and their cooperation and their reciprocity and their fairness and their justice and their loving are corrupted by the demands and requirements of the ideology of Islam. And that's most evident in a particular verse from the Quran. You were talking about using the text itself. Quran verse 24:2, which is about punishing adulterers. It says, "Strike the adulteress and the adulterer 100 times. Do not let compassion for them keep you from carrying out God's law, if you believe in God and the last day, and ensure that a group of believers witnesses the punishment. Do not let compassion for them keep you from carrying out God's law." Now, why do you think that they might have needed to add in that verse to the Quran? I suggest that it's because there were Muslims whose humanity and whose compassion were telling them, no, I shouldn't do this because it's wrong. And in order to get them to override their natural compassion, there was a verse added in saying, don't let your compassion stop you. Do it anyway. And that's a very powerful way of overriding people's compassion if you tell them that the creator of the universe is telling them that this is right. The Quran, like any religious text, the Quran is a very complex set of values that was written at different times. Parts of it written when Muhammad and his followers were being persecuted in Mecca, parts of it written when Muhammad and his followers were running the show in Medina, And not surprisingly, you get different sets of values coming out of those two different sets of circumstances. But the Quran promotes many very good things morally. Don't lie, be good to your parents, be good to the poor, set slaves free, don't oppress people, don't have compulsion in religion. These are obviously very good things. But in the same book, you also have that men can beat their wives in certain circumstances. You have verses about cutting off the hands of thieves, of killing disbelievers, of fighting non-Muslims until they're in a state of subjection. Now, inevitably, when these issues arise, you'll get arguments about, well, you know, these verses being different things, it was the context at this time, or you have to read it in the original Arabic. You know, you have any number of different arguments that suggest that these words don't mean what they actually say. But the difficulty with that is twofold. One is that by noticing that there are verses that you have to make those excuses for before you can justify them, irrespective of how you justify them, just by making that distinction, you're noticing that you're applying your own morality to the book. You're not getting your morality from the book, because if you were, you just automatically accept all of them on an equal basis. And the second difficulty is that Islam has no central theological authority, which means that ISIS or Al-Qaeda are as entitled to claim that their interpretation is the genuine word of Allah as you are to claim that they're mistaken. And they are as entitled to say that you're the ones that are theologically mistaken as you are to say about them. And the reality of history, the reality when you have these books that give these contradictory signals that can be interpreted by people on the basis of thinking that it's the creator of the universe telling them to do things. The reality is that Islam has consistently led to violence. From the massacre of the Jews in Medina, which was mentioned earlier on, after the Battle of the Trench, which was under Muhammad. This isn't even people misinterpreting afterwards. This is when he was in charge. Through centuries of atrocities against Hindus in India, through to today when Islamic states will persecute people for saying or doing or believing the wrong thing, where currently there's a Christian mother in Pakistan facing execution by hanging for a blasphemy charge that arose from some domestic disagreement. And two politicians who spoke out in her favour were murdered. The governor of Punjab, who was a Muslim, and the minority minister, who was a Christian. The governor of Punjab murdered by his own bodyguard. So this is what happens when you mix unchanging and unchangeable, or certainly very difficult to change ideologies because they're based on these books that are supposedly written by the creator of the universe, and that have these verses that clearly inspire violence. So if you ask me, are Muslims peaceful people, I'll say yes, of course they are. They're as peaceful as anybody else. If you ask me, is Islam a religion of peace? I'll say, no, it is not. It's not a religion of peace. It's not even a religion. It is an integrated ideology that combines religion, politics, judicial elements, and social governance. And it's an ideology imposed by force and unable to adjust to the evolving human rights standards that the Western world has gradually adjusted to. Not perfectly, but certainly a lot more than basing our ethics on books written hundreds of years ago and indeed thousands of years ago. So if you believe that freedom of conscience and freedom of religion and equality before the law and freedom from discrimination are more peaceful in principle than hanging blasphemers or flogging adulterers or cutting the hands off thieves, I ask you to oppose the motion. Thank you very much.
Now, this is the point of the night where we hand it over to the floor.
When I used to campaign against terrorism in Northern Ireland, there was a phrase that we used to use about people on both sides of the equation when atrocities that they committed were pointed out to them, and that phrase was whataboutery. And what it essentially means is instead of addressing what their side have done, they try to change the topic onto what other people have done. I didn't come here to argue that the West is perfect, and in terms of the human rights abuses of the West that were raised by Joe and others. I was over in Geneva a couple of weeks ago campaigning and briefing the UN Human Rights Committee about the abuses of human rights in Ireland, the issues that you're raising and others. So if you ask me to come here and debate that, I'll happily debate it, but if you ask me to come here and debate whether Islam is a religion of peace, I expect that to be what I'm discussing. The second speaker, look, I understand you're a good person. I really genuinely do, and I don't mean to pick on you, but it's just you happen to say it. This is one of the things that religion can do, and that faith, and it's not just, I mean, it's when you say about capitalism, I agree with you about capitalism. I think the problem isn't religion, the problem is faith and dogma, which can be applied to secular things like unregulated capitalism or communism or anything like that. If you approach any ideology with faith as opposed to proportionate beliefs based on evidence and questioning, then you're going to run into problems. But one of the things that I find, I mean, the phrase "get over 9/11 already," you know, that somebody who I know is a good person would use a phrase like that. I mean, it just shows how these things can it's like I was talking about earlier on about the desensitization, can corrupt our normal empathy and compassion and sensitivity and cause us to say things that I'm sure we don't really believe. Is that it? Okay. Okay, thank you very much.
So we'll ask for the last speaker from the proposition side, Abdullah Andalusi, to approach the podium.
Only 2 minutes. I mean, seriously, there's so much to respond to. Well, I'm gonna try to speed through this, so please forgive me. Right. I don't believe anyone should be killed for doing cartoons, but I don't think they should be exempt from being prosecuted if the Nazis were allowed to do cartoons against Jews. And anyone that does racist cartoons in this day and age deserves to be prosecuted. And the basis is inciting hatred, and inciting hatred should always be prosecuted within law and go into court and so on. But sure, I don't believe people should be killed though for that, of course. Debates and book publishing. Just please read Islamic medieval history. We had massive debates with atheists, Christians, public debates. Imam Abu Hanifa, great Islamic scholar, was famous for his debates in Baghdad against atheists. For some reason, there's lots of atheists in Baghdad. Islamic Baghdad, St. John of Damascus. Why is he called St. John of Damascus? He wrote books against Islam, published them, and he's from Damascus during the Islamic period. It's not the St. John of the Bible. Salman Taseer was killed by a guy who killed him because he disagreed with him trying to abolish an old colonial British law against blasphemy. It wasn't even Islamic law, it was a British colonial law against blasphemy, in exact wording. The Prophet Muhammad he didn't make a judgment against Banu Qurayza, the Jewish tribe. It was someone else because that Jewish tribe didn't trust his judgment. The two other Jewish tribes who were submitted to the Prophet's judgment were released and let go when they were exiled because they for trying to attack and betray the Muslim community and kill Muslims. So left up to the Prophet Muhammad, he'd let them go, but the Jewish tribe of Qurayza didn't trust him, and they picked someone who was their friend, and the friend was angry, and he said they should be killed, and so on. So that wasn't even the Prophet's judgment in the first place, and he gets blamed for that. The question about Syria, why are so many people dying in Syria? You know, what is horrific regime? The regime is a secular dictator. The whole battle is between Islamists and secularists, and the regime is a secular dictator. And just to absolutely finish off, we didn't elect al-Qaeda, but we always get blamed for it. Whereas many of these Western populations, they never get blamed for what their elected leaders do, and the massacres their elected leaders do, the invasions and the bombings their elected leaders do, yet we get blamed for things that we didn't even elect in the first place. I think that's a travesty. Thank you.
Abdullah Andalusi for that speech, and go towards Ian O'Doherty for his... Oh no, sorry. Mark Humphrys, sorry, for his speech in opposition.
Okay, a few really quick points because we're given no time. Loughnane, who made that speech, on his Facebook page, one of his inspirational people is Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. the suicide bomber of Shia mosques. So I won't take any. I won't take any advice from him. He's an Al-Qaeda supporter. Another speaker there said that if in his country, if you speak against Islam, you get arrested. If you say the wrong thing, if you criticise his religion, well, in this country you can criticise Christianity and Islam and all other religions and atheism and you don't get arrested. And I think that is better. And your country should become more like adopting those kind of freedoms instead of defending them and actually being proud of them. Abdullah said he would prosecute anybody who draws a cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad. He pretended it was all about inciting hatred or racism. But anybody, no, many of these were just kind of jocular, comical cartoons, the Danish ones, of the Prophet Muhammad, and they were drawn to make a point that nobody can draw a cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad without lunatics calling for their death or their prosecution. And if you call for their prosecution, in my book, you're a lunatic as well. If you Google a list of killings ordered or supported by Muhammad, you'll realise he was not a peaceful man. But I think that's okay, because in the future, Islam can evolve beyond that, just like Judaism and Christianity has evolved beyond Moses. Now, I realise it's a self-selected crowd in this kind of ambush that we're in tonight. And if we were looking at the kind of future of the West, or the future of Ireland indeed, you'd be massively depressed by what we have here on show. But in fact, I think in reality, there are reasons to hope. There are reasons to hope in the long run. There are no reasons to hope, I would say, or very few, in the short run. And the fact is that the problem, people are in denial about the problem that Islam has with violence. I would love the day when there are no suicide bombings, there is no Islamic terrorism, and Islam becomes, to people atheists like me, just another boring religion like Buddhism that we don't pay any attention to. Speed the death.
Thank you, Dr. Mark Humphrys, for his speech and information. And move to Shaykh Dr. Umar al-Qadri for his speech and information.
I didn't say that you were homosexual, that I dislike homosexuals, but apparently I was misquoted, and apparently that happens often with us Muslims. We get misquoted often. Talking about the Prophet Muhammad, would he agree with the violence? Absolutely he would not. All the two incidents that you have mentioned are actually out of context, and I thank Abdullah for mentioning them, and maybe we can have a debate one day about this topic. Was Prophet Muhammad a violent or a peaceful man? And then we could go into the seerah, could go into the life of the Prophet Muhammad to discuss this. Well, he got the chance to take revenge from the people in Mecca after being prosecuted, religiously persecuted, and after being abandoned and forced to leave his own city, Mecca. He came back with an army of 40,000 people, and what does he do? Does he kill everybody? No, he doesn't. He in fact says today is the day of mercy. It is not the day of revenge. Somebody mentioned two Dutch people. I happen to be from the Netherlands and from Pakistan both. Aryan Hirshiali is a confused lady. She confused religion and culture. Aryan Hirshiali, blamed her female genital mutilation experience on Islam, while everybody knows and should know that this is an African problem, or a problem related to certain countries in Africa, not a problem in Islam. Some people said that why would Muslims come in these countries, and would they want to go back to their countries? But let me tell you, all those countries that you did not invade, Muslims that come from those countries, they do go back, because these countries are still peaceful. Malaysia, Singapore, for example, Indonesia. But yes, countries like Pakistan, like Afghanistan, like Iraq, like Syria, that you have directly or indirectly invaded, yes, they are not peaceful countries anymore, and people do not like to live there. We have a problem of extremism. I agree with that. We do have a problem of extremists. All extremists happen to belong to a particular ideology. And we should maybe sometime discuss about that. Who is it that supported, who gave arms to the Syrian rebels? Which country was that? Yes, it was Saudi Arabia. And lastly, Saudi Arabia does not represent our faith. It is the Quran, the Hadith, and the prophetic conduct that represents our faith. Thank you.
The speaker from opposition for his speech, and move to Ian O'Doherty, the last speaker in summation. Here.
Well, that was 17 hours of our lives. None of us are ever going to go back to the longest bloody debate I've ever been to. Very quickly, just to get back to the motion, Islam is the religion of peace. If you think it is the religion of peace, go out and board the Quran and see how long you last. It's very simple. If you genuinely think Islam is a religion of peace, go out and do that. As regards the idea of incitement to hatred, the cartoons, an expression of contempt is not incitement of hatred. And I have contempt for your views. I have contempt for the person who slurred Miss Ian Horsey Halley like that. It's absolutely despicable. Frankly, it doesn't come as a huge surprise from what I've heard from a room like this. You're all contemptible. You're a perfect example of how the West is sleepwalking into suicide through its own smugness, through its own insecurity, and through its own patheticness. You're a disgrace.
Thanks, Speaker, for his words in the end. And move to our final speaker in proposition, Dr. Oliver Scharbrodt. Here we go.
Right, I'm probably the least excited about this topic, but motions are running high. I suppose I just want to reiterate 2 points that were raised earlier. One is the sort of diversity of interpretations. I think sort of throwing quotes from the Quran or from the Bible at each other is a quite simplistic approach to understanding how religion actually works. There's a whole range of interpretations, and I think I appreciate the point Mark made, about how religions are reinvented. I mean, obviously, you were slightly dismissive about saying it's illogical, irrational. I think this is human creativity. This is human resourcefulness. I mean, human life is contradictory, religions are contradictory, and we reinvent religion, and followers of all religions reinvent their religion at all the times, adapting them to the circumstances they live in, and this is happening in Islam, in Christianity, in all religions. There was a point, I think a very legitimate question about why this violence in Islam, and I tried with my historical excursus to sort of look at the roots of this kind of Western perception of Islam being a violent religion. In the contemporary context, again, looking a little bit of history and referring to a very important post-colonial theorist, Frantz Fanon, who, witnessing the kind of Algerian war for independence in the 50s and 60s, observing it, discussing, why are anti-colonial movements so violent? And his argument is because they respond to the actual violence and the structural violence that the colonized people have experienced through colonizing powers. And it's not just the fact to be conquered and killed and so on, it's the structural violence, it's the sort of inherent power relation that has characterized Western relations, the relationship of Western countries to non-Western societies, where the other culture, religion, is sort of seen as inferior, is denigrated. And sort of his argument is that anti-colonial movements are violent because they are reacting, they're responding to the violence they experience as part of colonialism in the context of European imperialism. So when we talk about jihadi movements, radical Islamism, I don't think it's a product of Islam. Obviously, those who are part of these movements refer to Islam, use Islam to justify their activities. I think it's a direct response to the violence they have experienced through European imperialism.
I thank all the guest speakers.